Appreciate it. Cool.
Ooh, sorry.
No need to be sorry at all. What time is it there in your land?
It's only 6, but
okay.
I teach during the day, and I love students, but it's like they kind of make you tired with like the energy, all the energy. Yeah,
I can imagine.
yeah.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the film. It is a punch of a movie that I kind of resonated with in a way that I didn't expect. So yeah, congratulations. It's really powerful stuff.
Oh, thank you, man. Yeah, I was scary thing to make, but I was excited at the result.
Yeah, as you should be, as you should be. I want to talk about, first of all, because this is obviously it's about separation, it's about relationships, it's about the distance that comes between us through marriage, through relationships and things like that. And as somebody who has gone through a separation, who has gone through a divorce, this felt pulled from my life in a way. I'm curious for you, where is that lived in experience or that understood experience coming from for this particular film?
Yeah, for me, it started to, I had reached this point in my own marriage where we had been married for a long period of time and had friends that were married, and they were entering this period where people were separating, and siblings. Some of my siblings had separated from their spouses, and it was like I don't know. It was like it was all around me, kind of a thing. Like I'm like, what's going on? And I ended up pretty paranoid about it in my own relationship, and Rebecca was very like, we're fine, don't worry about it. And I was like, what's happening? Like,
yeah.
And it was like very dismissive, and I thought that was very interesting. I was like, why are you so dismissive about it? And I'm not. And I began to think about some of the aspects of like, and not that I think she was dismissive because she was not worried. I don't think it was like dismissive as me as a person, but it made me really start to think about the differences of our relationship and approach. And so that was kind of like the kernel of the film for me. And then I just started really asking people like, what they were going through. And the male perspective, some of my friends acted in ways like so outside like who they are. Like I knew that like that period of time, like given a couple years, they would wish like, can I erase it? Can I like scrub it? And we not.
That's how I felt. Yeah.
What occurred,
Yeah.
And that was interesting to me that I was like, this is situational. Like, and there's not another environment where how you would respond in this circumstance. You don't ever really give yourself over to anybody the same way. As far as like, I mean, my siblings and my parents, I really love, but they actually love me unconditionally. I say stupid things or we get in massive arguments, and then it's but we'll come back around and make everything okay. And what I started to discover is people acting so out of character that I wanted to really explore an individual. Also, as it relates to kind of masculinity, of course, like there's this weird, what I keep saying, like the dialogues we're having are very healthy in society right now, but there's also this weird other element where it's like somebody pounds on the door at 4 a.m. It's definitely my wife kind of like, you're going to go get the door. And I don't like that stuff. I get very like nervous and afraid. She's like, you're ridiculous. And I'm like, why am I ridiculous? Like, so there is this under element of masculinity that I don't think is necessarily, it's not negative. I keep thinking like, that's how like somebody naively goes, I could build an engine, and then like does, there's that element. And I think that aspect of masculinity, we've defined it as the word masculinity. Men and women have it, like regardless of their gender, it exists, but it's so prevalent in our culture in the dialogue as men are supposed to do those things, And so I wanted to complicate it. David's trying to give his wife the room to grow, at the same time being like, I can't lose her though. And like both those things exist.
Yeah, it's that balance of trying to maintain what you've had and knowing what started the relationship and knowing what you've got. You've got 4 kids, that kind of thing, and trying to fight for that. And that fight is so hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
David is really trying to find this balance. And then the other aspect that I really wanted to explore in the writing part of it was the fact that, you know, like Rebecca and I got married. I was 22, she was 20, or maybe I was 23, she was 20. We're like, we're not fully realized people at all. And so I really was interested, like, Nikki's not wrong in her pursuit of like, who am I now that this like this chapter is ending and new chapter beginning where she's got more time on her hands. And it's like, well, who am I wanting to kind of explore that? And the reality that we grow, like nobody tells us that. I mean, my sister once got very upset at my parents when she was first married. And she said to them, like, you didn't argue in front of us. I thought you're like, good marriages don't argue. So when I'm in an argument with my husband, I'm like, oh, it's over, you know, and they're, you know, 6 months in. So there's also this learning of like how we ebb and flow. And David's really trying to understand that. And Nikki's really asking to explore it. And so I kind of like was like, nobody's making a wrong decision in this film. Everyone's making like just trying to grow as a human being. And that's interesting. But the result is collision, is like this aggressive collision between all parties.
Yeah. And that's what I liked, is that obviously the opening scene is very, you know, it's heightened and feels very violent, even though there's no violence there. But there are no particular villains here. Both people, as you're saying, are working towards a goal which might include the other, but they don't know. They're trying to work these things out, and they're doing it for the first time. And I felt that really, really keenly. It's it felt almost like documentary like, and I was like, geez, I hope these people are okay, you know, afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, my brother said to me once as he was working on his relationship, you know, I was like, what's up? You know, because it kind of came out of left field. And he said, like, look, I can either like address this now and like say it takes me 6 months to figure it out, and then we're married for another 30 years, or I can bury it and it be a problem that's buried underneath that just continues to be buried as we move along until it comes out. And that was like, oh, that's an interesting kind of assessment. So I was like, yeah, I think they are at this kind of juncture where it's like so important for them to do this, but also so very hard.
Yeah. One of the things which I found really interesting, I watched it, and, you know, literally at the end, I was like, this feels like a Kelly Reichardt film in a way. It feels pulled from that. And then I did some reading, and I read that you're inspired by her and her career and things like that. And of course, you're talking about teaching kids and things. And I'm curious, as a filmmaker, what draws you to her particular aesthetic? I'm a huge fan of her work. And so this felt like it was in that same wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, the first short I made, my collaborator Rodrigo, who I work with often, and I made this short that went to Austin Film Festival, and Wendy and Lucy was playing there. And I'm still trying to like figure out who I am, right? I'm an undergrad in college, being like, I want to do films, and trying to figure out. And I watched Wendy and Lucy, and was like if I ever made that film in my life, I could be done making movies. Like for me, it's such a brilliant, quiet film. And then I got an opportunity to talk with Jonathan. He was outside after, and I was, you know, I take these script writing courses, and they were like, it's got to be 100 pages and all this, like a minute and whatever. And I just said to him, like, that wasn't like an 80-page script, was it? And he's like, no. And I was like, all of a sudden, like Wendy and Lucy and Jonathan just gave me the liberties to be a filmmaker. You know, it was like both things happened at the exact same time. And I needed that license to really go in the direction, because at film school, you look at all these films, and you look at Spielberg and others, which are great, but you're kind of told like that's filmmaking. And to be able to see her work, and then to watch, and then, to know she was teaching. And I was like, oh, you know, I was like, oh, she went into teaching. That gave her more liberty to not have to like fold to anybody. This is really interesting. And I just started to mirror my kind of work process like to hers. And one of the things and it's not just her, Barbara Loden's film Wanda was a big reference for this film as well, just because I just loved how it explored, and the frame always most often considers photographs kind of consistently in that movie. And that's something that Oscar and I talked a lot about. And it was just like the way in which she's very comfortable just sitting for a while with your characters and letting them act.
Yeah.
I think there's power to that. I mean, I'm exploring it because I do think it's not new. I mean, there's the plethora of filmmakers, but for me, it's like all the little bits. There's a part where David is in the middle, like the pause between the yelling, and he just starts picking at something on the truck. And I'm like, that matters. It's like a disconnect. He's trying to disconnect somehow for this like brief moment to figure out how to calm himself down, yet he can't. And the second he stops picking, it just starts up again. You know, those moments are just, for me, are just as critical as, you know, really great writing or really big, you know, set pieces or whatever.
Yeah, I think, I mean, yes, the narrative is possibly nothing new, but I think the way that you present it is, because, you know, after getting divorced, I was trying to figure out, how do I do this? And there's, you know, there's books and there's articles online and stuff like that, but I'm a film lover. So you go and seek out films and I watch it all. Yeah. I'm like, this doesn't reflect me. And then I watch this and I'm like, I kind of wish I had this a few years ago. You know, and because I can understand it and appreciate it, and you present that kind of separation in a way that feels new.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, in the work I do, I think the way people really communicate, you know, like sometimes, again, in your writing class, they'll be like, oh, you want to write dialogue the way you wished you had said, you know. And this guy, there's a tattoo, and I think it's a painting, but it's also, I saw it on a tattoo that says, it was like this thick book that says things I should have said, volume 8, you know. And it's like, I'm almost like the opposite. I'm like, if I'm sitting in a restaurant and I'm hearing really great dialogue between two people, I'm just cataloging it, because I think the way we really kind of talk about things, the messy, the sloppy, you know, the way in which things are like missaid aren't like necessarily correct. I think there's like tons of value in that, because it in many ways, I mean, it feels more real. And then all of a sudden I in many ways start to feel heard. I'm like, okay, these people talk like I do, and they like are dealing with a problem I'm dealing with. And so I really find a lot of joy in trying to figure out how the characters are going to talk and how it's messy.
Yeah. I liked how the dad, you know, when he moves back home again and the dad's just straight back into that old routine as well. You know, it's the tidiness. You're talking about the messiness of how we talk, but then there's the tidiness and the organization, like 20 years of, you know, not saying these things, and then it just erupts.
Yeah.
Like it was yesterday.
Yeah, totally. And that experience is really interesting as it relates to that scene, because I was married when I went to film school and already had 2 children. And for a period, because we couldn't get housing, I had to live at my parents' house. And I was surprised how quickly they just act like you'd never left high school. And you start to like fold back into patterns of like how you existed in that space as well. So I like that kind of relationship between David and his dad, where you get to understand where it's almost like this is where he came from, so that you can like all this erratic stuff. It's almost like grounds him and like, this is who he is if you met him happily married, or even like, you know, 2 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, that was like, for me, I remember moving back with my parents and I was just like asking for permission to go out at night. I'm like, I'm over 30 years old. Why am I asking for permission?
Yeah. I remember saying, hey, I'm going to run down to the 7-Eleven. I'll be back. And I'm like, why do I could just walk out the store.
Yeah, exactly. You're an adult.
Yeah.
Well, look, this is a really great film, and I really can't wait to revisit it as I grow older and see it, because I think there is a lot to learn from this film, both as a artistic merit and then the narrative merit and the themes in there. So I just really want to applaud what you've done here, and thank you very much for sharing your work with the world. I'm really excited to see what you continue to do, and I've got to seek out your older films now too as well.
Yeah. Well, my favorite of our older ones is God Bless a Child. If you venture, that was really it was based off of a story my dad had told me, and I tried to. His mother had left him a letter. You'll see when you move the movie, but it was that same kind of how can we capture sibling relationships in hard times, and those like interesting obligations that like fall in line when difficulty occurs. I think is very interesting.
Well, I look forward to seeing it. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for your time. I really
Hey,
appreciate it.
thank you
Yeah.
so much, Andrew.